question for the first time.
What about the round predictions or no?
You can ask me
Or
something.
you can ask me my predictions. That would be cool.
Yeah, but like we need to kind of. I don't have the time. We have to ask you that if I'm jumping in. So maybe you can introduce me and then ask you. But if you introduce me, I think that
Don't be afraid.
then you stop, and then I see that you are stopping, and then
So do you want to introduce the players?
I think we are always doing that. Yeah, just so people like if you stop kind of forward, okay, so participants, who do you think is I don't
As of like not very long ago, let's say a year and a half or 2 years.
The following is a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club. With 35 grand on the line, 20 international chess professionals compete in St. Louis as USChessChamps.com presents the first ever Summer Chess Classic.
Hello everyone, welcome to the St. Louis Chess Club studio and the 2018 Summer Chess Classic. I am Women Grandmaster Katerina Nemcova and I am here with International Master Eric Rosen.
Hey guys.
Summer Chess Classic is part of the Chess Club Seasonal Classic Series featuring strong players rated 25 to 2600 from all over the world. We will see some familiar but also some new faces. Eric, what an exciting event ahead of us.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Very, very strong event. We have 2 sections filled with Grandmasters. And it's the first time that the Summer Classic is being run at the St. Louis Chess Club. And it's not even summertime, it's still spring.
I also feel the Chess Club wants to be ahead of time.
That's true, but the weather is warm enough for summer. So without further ado, let's get into the player rosters for Group A. We have Jeffrey Xiong leading the pack, rated 2661 FIDE. And we have Alexander Indjic closing out the pack, rated 2600 FIDE. So we have a very close range of players where really anyone can be in contention for first place.
And look at the federation. I mean, we have players from United States, from Netherlands, Germany, Kazakhstan, Hungary, Serbia. I mean, it's a so exciting field.
That's right. Do you have any picks for who you think will take the money home?
I think this is so difficult to make, especially before any result is done. I would maybe go with Akobian. I think he played really great US Championship, although the finish maybe was not that great. I think now he is relaxed and do his best.
Yeah, Vara's a good pick. I mean, he had kind of a rough finish to the US Championships, but very strong start. I think for him, it's a lot about consistency. But my pick for the tournament is Jeffrey Xiong. I mean, he's been around for many years now. I first saw him at the St. Louis Chess Club when he was just a tiny little person, and now he's Grandmaster, top 100 in the world, and I know he's devoting a lot of energy to improving his game further. So let's move on to the roster for Group B, where we have another very strong field of players ranging from just under 2600 FIDE. We have Camille Dragon, rated 2591, leading the pack. Rounding out the pack, we have Tatev Abrahamian, 2354 FIDE. She's fresh off finishing the US Women's Championship. Any picks, Katerina?
I'm really happy, first of all, to see in this field some female players. And also in this field, there are so many college players. We have represented UTRGV by Andrei Stupokin, Vladimir Belos. We have the coach of SLU. I think this is a great event. And my pick, let's go with the first one, with Camille Dragon.
Not a bad pick. And we should note that a lot of the collegiate players have just finished their semesters at university. I was actually playing a few blitz games with Sergei Matsenko last night, and he was saying he finished his semester a couple of days ago, and I don't know if he wants me saying this, but I don't think he had too much time to prepare for this event.
So let's look now at the tournament format.
So tournament format, we have 2 10-player round-robin groups with a time control of 90 minutes for 40 moves, plus 30 minutes for the remainder of the game. And throughout the game, we have a 30-second increment. You know what that means. Games can last a long, long time.
We can expect a lot of fighting because also the players are not allowed to agree on any draw before move 30. So not only the games will be long, but hopefully there will be a lot of fights. What do you think, Eric?
That's right. And I mean, games can last, 5-6 hours, and it takes a lot of physical and mental stamina for an event like this. And it's 9 straight days of chess. There's no rest days. So we should take a look at the schedule for the event. We have games every day starting at 1 p.m. St. Louis time, Central Time Zone. With the last day, the game starts 2 hours earlier at 11 a.m. And I mean, we're all hoping for a playoff. That would be really exciting to see. If that happens, it will take place 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 23rd.
So we are on air every day at 3:30. So now let's look at the games that are currently being played.
That's right, and we have pairings for Group A, which the round started about 2.5 hours ago. We have Yaro Jerobuk playing against Benjamin Bach, Sam Sevian against Peter Prohaszka, Daniel Fridman against Vasif Durarbayli, Alexander Indjic against Varujan Akobian, and Jeffrey Xiong against Rinat Jumabayev. And I think for today, our game of the day is Jeffrey Xiong against Rinat Jumabayev, where we have the strongest average rating out of any game in the field. Who's your pick for this game?
I'm Rinat Jumabayev. It's a completely new name, new face. I've never seen this player before. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm only familiar with Jeffrey, who I've known for many years. I mean, I'm rooting for Jeffrey as an American player, but
we have to do that.
I mean, Rinat Jumabayev is over 2,600 FIDE, and I mean, he has to be somewhat decent at chess, right?
Absolutely. So now let's look at the pairings for Group B. So we have Kamil Dragun against Dinara Saduakasova, Tatev Abrahamian against Sergei Matsenko, Josh Friedel against Alejandro Ramirez, Rinat Aghasarian against Andrei Supokin, and Vladimir Belos against Ali Marandi. What do you think is the key match of the day? I
mean, the game that I'm looking most forward to is the one between Josh Friedel and Alejandro Ramirez, the two American players in Group B. Personally, I know both of them very well. Josh Friedel, we went shopping last night with. Very, very good chef. It's probably, out of all the GMs in the world, he probably makes the best eggs Benedict. And Alejandro Ramirez, fresh off doing Spanish commentary for the US Championships. So he's been involved with a lot of high-level chess. And he's also the coach of the St. Louis University chess team. So I know he puts a lot of effort into coaching elite GMs and puts a lot of effort into opening preparation.
So we now introduce those really strong players from all over the world. They will be fighting hard. So let's see what they are fighting for. What is the prize fund for Group A? So it's 22,000 in total. Eric, how do you feel about this prize fund?
I kind of wish I was playing the event rather than being a commentator. It's a very generous prize fund with $6,000 for first prize. 10th place is still a very hefty $1,000. So I'm sure the players are taking this very seriously, and they're going to be fighting for every game.
And Group B has also a very nice prize fund. The total is 1,400 here.
14,000.
14,000. I'm sorry.
With a $4,000 first place prize, $500 for 10th place. That can buy a lot of Starbucks and a lot of free dinners. So it should be an exciting event.
Absolutely. So let's look at the key matchup of the day for Group A.
So yeah, let's start with the game between Jeffrey and Rinat Jumabayev, where it began as a very kind of dry, symmetrical opening. If we go back to see how this position happened, it started off as an exchange Slav, which is probably one of the most boring openings in chess.
And we were looking at this game earlier, and we were thinking like, okay, this is the game of the day, but it may not be that interesting. But let's look what happened there. Yeah,
I want to zoom through the opening because, okay, both players developed their pieces, nothing too much eventful, and then at some point the position just exploded after Queen c3, Knight c4. Let's go forward a bit further. After Knight d6, Black's setup was a bit awkward. After Knight c5, the knights got traded. The pawn structure became a bit less symmetrical. And after Knight d4, or Knight e4, Queen d4, Rook a8, and b4, it seems like White has a really nice pull in this position. Very stable pawn on c5, supported by the b pawn. Black's bishop, a bit passive on e7. And if we go forward even further, after f6...
Actually, if I can stop you here, let's look at the knight on e4. I mean, that's an amazing piece, but the knight actually started on being on c6 and having nowhere to go. And that's a really interesting maneuver how Rinat got the knight to e4.
That is true, and it's probably one of the best pieces for Black in the game. So we'll have to see if White can manage to play around the knight or somehow trade off the knight. But it is a strong point for Black in the position. What happened in just a few more moves, though, after Rook d1, e5, it seemed like Jeffrey just fell for an elementary tactic. I mean, just getting forked. The pawn is attacking both the queen and the bishop. What do you make of this position, Katerina?
I mean, you may think that he fought for easy tactics, but I think that's the last thing we should consider here, knowing that he's such a strong player. I mean, when you look at this position, you see rooks who are like on the best files that they can possibly be. They are really strong. They're attacking the center. This is just a great position for White. And if the pawn on d5 will fail, and probably White will get the pawn, I mean, the light square bishop will be also great. And black pieces, rook on a8, rook on f8, queen on d8, I mean, they're all on the last rank. It will be very difficult to coordinate them.
Yeah, I mean, but we have to see, white is losing a piece. And let's go forward to the current position after knight take e5, f take e5, queen take e5. Black has an extra minor piece here, but is losing a lot of pawns.
Well, it's 3 pawns plus the b7 pawn.
I mean, it could be 4 pawns for a knight.
So that's what happened. Queen takes d5, king h8.
Aha. Oop, let's go back to that position. Let's get the current position on the board. Queen take d5 was
So
played.
it's already 3 pawns for a piece. b7 pawn is kind of weak and can fall. And then the c pawn can run for a queen. So it's very tricky to know what to do about that with
Oh, this
pieces.
is incredibly imbalanced. I mean, I think it's easier to play for white when you have the pawns, because the intuitive plan is just to capture pawns and push pawns and try and make a queen. Meanwhile, black probably has to figure out how to coordinate the minor pieces. And usually in chess, a minor piece in the middle game is more valuable than 3 pawns. But if white's pawns get rolling, especially on the queen side, it can be a bit scary for black. So I would have to pick Jeffrey in this game. I like his I like the dynamic situation that he's created, and
Black try can be something like queen g6, try to develop the rooks, maybe some tricks on the king, like taking on h3. But my pick would be white as well. I think it's difficult to play this with black pieces.
Certainly, and we'll have to keep an eye on this game. I mean, the players are about level on time with 20 minutes per side, and they're only on move 23, which means they have still 17 moves to make in 20 minutes to get to move 40, to get that extra time. So we'll definitely have to come back to this game pretty soon, because they'll probably be in time trouble within maybe 10 to 15 more minutes.
So let's look at Alejandro's game, the key matchup for the B group.
For sure, and with Josh Friedel against Alejandro Ramirez, we have a more positional battle. Let's just go back quickly to see how this position occurred. We'll start from the opening. It was another Slav, but this time it wasn't an exchange Slav. Josh Friedel maybe chose a more fighting variation with queen c2. And then Alejandro plays this move g6, which is a somewhat alternative way of playing the Slav. I think the player most notable for playing this sort of structure is Katerina, who very much enjoys putting the bishop on g7. A very solid structure. And Josh wasted no time going for the center expansion with e4. Very thematic move. But we don't see this too often so early on in these queen pawn openings. In this case, because white developed early with queen c2 and knight c3, e4 does become possible. So let's go forward to the middle game position. Both sides develop. Bishop f5 was played, which looks like a nasty pin, but Friedel gets out of it very simply with knight take f6, bishop take f6, and queen b3. And we can see maybe some slight advantage for white. I mean, two nice pawns giving white a bit more space, and also maybe some target on b7 as well. So going forward, queen c7, h3, so maybe some slow play. And then Alejandro thrusts forward with this move b5. And white's in a situation now where it's maybe not entirely clear how to deal with a pawn tension. Normally in chess, if your opponent executes a pawn break, you have 3 options. You can either take the pawn, you can push your pawn, or you can do something else. In this case, Josh Friedel chose to do something else with bishop h6. After rook fc8, he played somewhat of a controversial move here, c5.
And just to stop you, Eric, for a second, we also have a result in this section where Ali Marandi won against Vladimir Belos. So
That's
maybe
true.
if we want to go to that game first to see what happened.
Yeah, that actually finished unexpectedly. We can hop over to this game and then come back to the Friedel game. It ended with a very unexpected tactical blunder. Ali Marandi was actually in the studio space before the broadcast, and he was showing this game on the board. Let's go back to the position maybe from here where black was under serious pressure. I mean, the king was in the center. The center is wide open. White had ideas of queen a4 check, and white played a very strong move, bishop f4, which is actually a pretty brilliant resource, even though the bishop is not defended. If queen take f4, white could play this intermediate queen a4 check, and then after a move like knight d7, black is pretty much lost here. So, so Ali Morandi had to fight his way back and play a bit passively. He played the move queen c8, and after knight e5, black was finally able to castle, but white still had a lot of pressure. Rook a7 played.
Now, I just want to mention, it's really great to see, starting with the bishop f4, how white is really trying to develop all of the pieces. Like the bishop on c1, when we move it back, we see that it's the last piece in the white's camp that didn't make a move. I mean, there's also queen, but at least that is developed. So bishop c4 is a great move, like developing the bishop. And then when you see the bishop moves, then the knight moves to the center, and that we have another bishop on e2 that is not doing anything anymore. So we move it to f3. So we see how these grandmasters just help and work with their pieces to really find the best spot and develop them.
And actually, that's one of the big differences I see between grandmasters and amateur players, is just how they treat their pieces. Grandmasters take a lot of care in finding the absolute best squares for their pieces, while amateur players sometimes are careless, sometimes choose bad squares for their pieces. So that's one of the best ways to improve in chess, is to actually see how grandmasters coordinate their pieces and work together to pressure the opponent.
Absolutely, and also grandmasters don't have like a favorite piece. I see with weaker players, they often have like, oh, I really like this bishop, and they care about it, and then the knight in the corner is of no concern for them. So it's really important to treat all pieces similarly and care about their development.
That's right, and let's go forward to the tactical moment in which Bellis just completely collapsed after bishop e7. Ali Morandi was saying earlier that white should play rook c1 to prepare the c5 move, but Bellis chose to play c5 right away, which already looks a bit suspicious because black has 3 pieces attacking c5, and white only has 1 defender. And Ali Morandi found a pretty nice resource here to play pawn e5, in which he's attempting to distract the knight on d3 and simply liquidate the position. And then I believe the losing move from white was queen to e3, and after bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, e take f4, white's just losing a piece. The queen's attacked, the knight is hanging, nothing to do.
This is an easy tactic, but I think it can also happen the way that after e5, white just didn't want to make a draw. Because if you just take the pawn on e5 with knight, everything exchanges, it looks like it's going to be a drawish position. And sometimes when we want to avoid draw no matter what, I mean, this is the drawback. We can fall into some easy traps.
That's right. And we do have another result in Group A between Yaro Jerabuk and Benjamin Bach. The position apparently ended in a draw, except I see the board on screen there, and I mean, this does not look like a drawish position at all. It looks incredibly crazy. I don't know what happened here. If we go back a few moves, it wasn't even repetition. So what happened? White had this huge pawn expansion on the king side. Black was going for play on the queen side. If we go forward here, e5 was played. Pretty explosive move, trying to open up the diagonal for the queen and the bishop. Knight a4 was played with the counterattack. Queen b3 check. The queens got traded. And now I see, after knight c3, I mean, the position looks crazy, but they probably agreed to a draw here based on the line where white can very simply take on c3, and after the trade, take. It's an opposite-colored bishop ending.
Yeah, that's what I think they thought. I mean, you exchange that now, something like bishop d4, maybe rook takes c6, the pawn trade, and I mean, we have opposite-colored bishops. There's just no way to break in.
That's right, and that's kind of the tendency with opposite-colored bishops in such endgame positions, is they tend to lead to very drawish positions, especially if things get traded off. So
let's look
already
now
2
at the
results
game
done.
of Friedman Daniel against Vasif Durarbayli. I think that was a really interesting game starting from the beginning.
That's right, and this was one that we were taking a close look at earlier just because the position from the opening was very sharp. It came from a Grunfeld line, which I assume is pretty theoretical. Black chose to employ this double fianchetto setup with both bishops having potential for the position opening up. And I think the critical moment came when Black played bishop take f3, where the queen is tied down to the bishop on d2, meaning if queen take f3, very simply queen take d2, and Black would be up a piece. So White played pawn take f3, and then we got a very imbalanced position where White has very damaged pawn structure on the king side, but White has a bishop pair. So somewhat imbalanced, perhaps chances for both sides. A lot has happened since then. Let's go forward. I know Black went for some queenside play, or for some kingside play, and queen c8 was a nice move, making use of the geometry across the board, hitting both the bishop on c4, the pawn on h3. So Black won the pawn.
And let's stop it here, b4, knight c6, and maybe you can think about what White can do now. The queen is kind of attacking the White king. There are not yet some pieces, but White wants to think how to protect the king and what to do. And I think Daniel found a really nice maneuver here.
Yeah, this move bishop b7, it's, I mean, at first it looks like a tactical move, but it's also a positional move because the bishop can, in many cases, help defend along the long diagonal. And in some cases, White could play f4 and the bishop could drop back to g2.
Absolutely. So let's say if Black plays here knight takes b4, we can play simply f4 and get the bishop back. King is safe. I think White is totally great in this position, and Black can have some trouble. But Vasif played just amazing move. Like, I did not expect it.
Very strange move, rook c8, leaving the rook hanging, but defending the knight on c6. And White made the decision that this bishop is more valuable than the rook, and he chose not to take it. I think for a good reason, because the bishop can be a very big asset later on in the game. White chose a more defensive option with queen f1, and Black, of course, does not want to trade queens here. The rule in chess, when you're debating whether to trade queens, you always have to think about king safety. In this case, White's king is far less safe, so Black should avoid the queen trade. Vasif made the right decision playing queen h5. And the game continued. Let's zoom forward to the current position. Knight f3, bishop take f3, queen take f3. Lots of moves have been played. Black still avoiding the queen trade, trying to open up the position further, trying to get more pieces into play. I do have to pause after rook take b5. The rook appears to be hanging, but if we notice, the rook on b1 is a bit overworked because it's defending the rook on d1, which is being attacked by the queen. So some very nice tactics here from Vasif. So White did not take on b5. White played a4, and some more trades. And after the dust settles, it looks like Black is up a clean pawn. And of course wants to still keep queens on the board. a6 played. Let's zoom forward even more. I mean, this looks very, very problematic for White. Bishop e1, such a depressing square for the bishop.
Yeah. I mean, we can mention that Vasif is our former teammate from Webster University. So we know that he's a very strong player, very active player. So moves like rook a8, I mean, that's what his arsenal is. He can really find these tactical strong moves.
That's right, and I wouldn't be surprised if most of the opening is based on some sort of opening preparation. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to get him down for an interview later on, assuming this game doesn't go much longer. Because, I mean, if we look at the position, there's ideas of rook d1, and White's pawn structure is just so unfortunate. I'm thinking maybe Black should start with just a very stabilizing move like h5, create some loot for the king, and then bring the rook in. And I would bet a lot of money on Vasif in this game.
Yeah, this is the type of the position that can take 2 more hours to be played, but what Black has advantage that is very hard to lose. So he will just try until White is going to be tired and make a mistake. But we have another very interesting game, Indjic against Akobian. So let's look at it. What's happening there?
This is insane. I was looking at this position much earlier from the opening, and it started as some kind of standard Nimzo Indian. I would like to go back and just look at the opening briefly in this game, because it does bring back some nostalgia for me. Nimzo Indian is one of my favorite openings as Black to play against d4. Starts with the move bishop b4. And they actually went into one of the very first lines I learned in the Nimzo, where black essentially develops all the pieces pretty harmoniously with the early knight e4, and then plays f5. And when I first learned this line, I was very intrigued because black has this slightly unusual setup with the pawn structure, playing this early f5, controlling the e4 square with a lot of the pieces. And I actually learned a very funny line many years ago, where it starts off, white can play this move, queen c2, and it's a huge fight for the e4 square. Black would then take on c3, knight d2, oops, sorry, black's move, castle, and knight d2. And it looks like white is just trying to put everything on the e4 square, trying to remove the knight. And then black has a very strong move, queen h4, supporting e4. And I'm showing this just because the next move is very aesthetic. After g3, black has a very unexpected knight g5. Have you seen this before?
I've seen this. I think actually you showed me.
Did I show you it?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I mean, it has to be at least a year since I've actually seen this played, and the idea being that after pawn take queen, black is very happy to deliver checkmate to the white king.
This is excellent example of seeing how the bishop on b7 is really far away, but it's very strong. The diagonal is wide open, and this is just perfect way for black to attack the king. And also the knight on e4, as Eric mentioned, that's going to be even in the game. You will see how important that square is and how white want to defend that square.
That's
and move the knight away.
So we should actually go back and see what happened in the game. Because white chose a different idea, knight e2, which looks a little strange, because it's actually removing a piece from controlling the e4 square, but the idea is to leave the bishop a bit awkward on b4. The bishop is just staring into blank space. It can't trade itself off for the knight, and maybe a move like a3 is coming. So let's go forward. Bishop d6, so maybe improving the bishop, and then knight d2. And if we see the white's idea was to play f3, and now I think white has succeeded in the battle of controlling the e4 square. And then from this position, both sides maybe completed development. We'll go much more forward to the current position. We see the slightly unusual knight b1 to a3 with the idea of knight b5. A bit unexpected, but I mean, this goes back to the whole idea that grandmasters they're always looking for the best squares for their pieces. So I think in this position, Alexander Indjic probably realized the knight is not doing anything on d2. He envisioned it being on a much more effective square like b5.
Absolutely,
so
and even if it takes more moves to move the knight, it's really worth it because the knight on d2 just cannot do anything. So that's really important to see how we can transfer the pieces to better squares.
That's right, and black very simply played a6, which takes away the b5 square for the knight, but the knight has another maneuver to come to c2, and the game progressed. Bishops got traded. Keep going here to the current position. Queen e3, e5, and g4, and the position just seems to be exploding. Black has a lot of pressure on the king side, but it looks like white might be trying to orchestrate some kingside attack as well.
But again, look at the bishop on b7. I mean, that's a real weapon. That's a real weapon against the king on h1. Now the game continued. Pawn takes g4, and pawn takes g4.
And yeah, here we have the current position where, I mean, black is trying to perhaps create some more open lines on the king side. But I mean, I really like the harmony for black in this position. The bishop aligned with the queen, or aligned with the king, and the rook aligned with the queen. It's usually a very good idea if you can put your lesser valuable pieces aligned with your opponent's more valuable pieces. It can lead to a lot more tactical possibilities.
I am wondering here, what if we do something like knight g6 to f4? Like
knight
sacrificing
F4.
the knight on h5. Just
Okay,
an idea.
what if I take it?
I take the bishop.
I'll take it.
Then I play e4.
Wow, e4. Trying to open up all the lines.
Yes.
Like the
the
rook's
problem is
coming
that probably
in.
you have still queen e3, and I cannot, unfortunately, take on f3, or can I?
That
Because the
could be
rook
an
is
issue. This
hanging,
rook is undefended on e8.
and I go back to rook f8, because I
So
also
rook e f8.
I also have a threat that I can take on e2 and then take the rook on f1.
I think white has a very strong move in this position. Clearly, black wants to open up both the f-file and the diagonal, but I think white could just kill all of black's fun with the very simple f4. And I don't think this line is too impressive for black.
I actually meant taking on f3.
Oh, you
rook
want to take on f3?
Yeah, just sacrifice the rook.
Oh, sacrifice a rook. Wow.
Maybe it's too much. We'll just see.
I had a friend in high school, his main slogan was, sacrifice everything, it might be mate. And he won a lot of games, but he also lost a lot of games. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the best strategy to
I had a friend
to play
in my
for.
own club who once told us that he played a really good game and he sacrificed a queen and sacrificed a rook and then he sacrificed a knight. It was really cool. And then I asked, so how did you play? And he was, oh, I lost. And I was like, okay, well.
Well, there's a distinction between a sacrifice and a blunder. Sometimes
Exactly.
if you sacrifice and you lose, it's a blunder. But if you sacrifice and you win, it's a sacrifice.
So let's see. If I go rook f8 instead of king h7,
Oh, you want to play rook f8?
because probably you have
Well,
to
there's a
take
lot
the
of
rook.
things attacked. Yeah, what if I just take the rook?
Yeah, I think that's the only thing you can do. But I take with king.
Mm-hmm.
And now the pawn on f3 is actually very strong because there are some g2 threats with checkmates. The knight on c2 is kind of off.
But I have bad news for you in this position. Your
What do you
best
want to
piece
do?
on b7 is about to be your worst piece. d5.
Okay.
And
Can I
are you
defend
going to
the
take on
pawn?
d5?
I mean, probably I have to, but it's not what I wanted to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
guess
think white has a bit too much material.
this is
for
too
the
much.
queen.
But there are some ideas like this that really just exposing the king with some sacrifices can be a possibility.
Yeah, we have. So this is currently the position. I'm sure black is perhaps pondering all of these potential sacrifices. It's a very rich position, and it's only the first day. There's some pretty exciting games that we'll have to keep our eyes on.
Yeah. So let's look at another game from the B tournament. No, we also have a result there where Grandmaster Agasarian drew with Andrei Stupokin.
Another draw. So far we have 2 draws and 1 decisive game. The current position looks incredibly dry. Let's zoom through this game. Let's see if there was any excitement. We have a Catalan. I think we had a few Catalans in the games today. The opening was exciting, but I don't know if we want to spend too much time on this game. Let's keep going here. Sometimes with these Catalan positions, the center can explode, and then we're left with very symmetrical pawn structure. It seems like that's what happened in this game, just a lot of trades. And after all the simplifications, it's just equal material and really no side having one advantage. So I don't think we're going to have to spend too much time on that game.
Yeah, and we have some supporters of Kamil Dragun from the chat. So let's see how Kamil Dragun is playing with Dinara Sadukasova.
Dinara, so that's Group B.
Yes.
And we have a slightly unusual position. Did white ever castle in this game?
My guess would be no.
The king is still on e1, a rook is on g1. Let's zoom through. Don't want to give too much emphasis on the opening. But if we just look at white's king, so white played the early rook g1, being provoked by the bishop. We should mention castling would not be a legal move. It would also just be a bad move, but the bishop does control f1. So rook g1 was forced, and queen c7 with a counterattack. Some complications here. White chose to play knight g4, some simplifications. There is one factor in this position which pops out right away. Do you have any guesses to what that might be?
That's the opposite colored bishops.
Exactly.
I think that's a really important part of the game.
Right, which we saw before in the other game.
Yes, and the rule is usually who attacks has an advantage because the squares are not defended by the other bishop. But it is not clear if I can really take advantage of this here, because anytime the bishop can be on f4, the squares can be defended by the pawns. Now Eric is somewhere else in the position. Let's see.
That's right. I mean, this looks like the current position. Let's see if we have any updates. We have rook g8 just played. I mean, if I had to predict the result, I would think it should be a draw, but you can never know with queens on the board. Sometimes both sides can have some potential attacking chances. And the pawn structure is so weird that I wouldn't be surprised if one of the players could perhaps slip up. We should also note that black appears to be in severe time pressure, only having less than 3 minutes on the clock.
Yes, and that can be a big difficulty, especially when sometimes you have to be figuring out what is the exact proper move here that you don't have this time. Now, one thing I want to note, we are not using any engines here. So I would recommend for you to do the same and really try to understand it yourself without any engine help, because the help can be very often inaccurate without you understanding the position. So just wanting to throw it out there.
That's true. Unfortunately, we don't have a Maurice we can go to for the engine analysis. So all of the commentary will be our own thoughts. And I mean, we're trying to be instructive, and we are keeping an eye on the YouTube chat. So shout out to everyone watching around the world. If you guys have questions or anyone who you're rooting for, make yourself heard. Let's move on. I do want to go back to the Vasif game.
What if we start with Tatev Abrahamian's game against Sergei Matsenko? I think she has a very nice position.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the beginning we said that every time the first game is very difficult for grandmasters or even the weaker players in the field to play, because you are just starting off. You don't know who you are playing, how is the tournament going to turn out. So anything can happen in the first round, and I feel Tatev has a more comfortable position here.
Yeah, I mean, we see another obstacle bishop position. This is
that's
this
a theme for the first round.
The third game so far, obstacle bishops, but queens are on the board, and we should immediately point out the time situation. Tatev has less than 4 minutes. A very well defended pawn on a5, and I will say queens are not usually the happiest types of pieces to blockade pawns. Which looks a little bit uncomfortable for black, given that the queen might have to stay on the queen side for a long time, keeping an eye on the a-pawn. But it is black's move. Sergei is thinking in this position. I wouldn't be surprised if white tries to orchestrate some kind of kingside attack, given that black's two major pieces are far off on the queen side. So perhaps a move like queen e7, maybe some potential pawn storm, perhaps rook e1. These are all potential ideas for white to try and put Tatev under pressure.
Yes, I think this is a very interesting game. Now Sergei played rook e8, and that's a move that he has to make, because otherwise, if white could go rook e1, then that could create some difficulties on the 7th rank.
That's true. I like to tell my younger students, rooks on open files have smiles. And in this position, the e-file is one of the only open files. It's a good square for the rook, prevents any sort of counterplay from white. If white wants to play rook e1, it probably leads to more drawing chances for black.
Yeah, so any exchange that is done here, if there are the opposite colored bishops left, I mean, that's a draw. That's nothing to do. So we need to try to attack, but now it may be a little difficult with the rook being on open file.
That's right.
So let's move on to a different game.
Sure.
Which one we haven't seen yet? Or let's move on to the tournament A. For example, Sevian against Prohaszka. Peter, what is happening there? We haven't looked at that.
We were looking at this game before the broadcast started, and this was a game that I wanted to try and avoid as much as possible, because it came from a Berlin opening, which is, at least in my opinion, one of the more boring openings in chess.
It's very strategical. Let's put it in a diplomatic way.
Yeah, strategical, positional. It was a great choice for Vladimir Kramnik against the very aggressive Garry Kasparov. And I think it was a good choice from Peter against Sam Sevian, because Sam is known to be kind of a tactical genius. And I think it's probably a great strategy to steer the game in more positional waters.
I absolutely agree. And here in this tournament, we will see, a lot of prep, playing the trendy games, trendy lines. But the players will also try to be tricky and play openings that are not comfortable for their opponents. So now when we think about Sam Sevian being an active and tactical player, of course, Peter Prohaszka will try to defend it a different way. I mean, to attack it a different way by playing openings that maybe do not suit him and play something that's more strategical.
That's right. What do you think about this position? I mean, white has built up a pretty impressive coordination of the pieces. I mean, this kind of menacing-looking pawn structure on the king side. Black seems to be incredibly passive.
But the pair of bishop can be tricky. I mean, anytime there will be c5, bishop c6, the pieces can develop. And another point to make is, how do you want to proceed? Like, do you want to do h4, h5 at one moment? I'm not sure if it's that easy for you to do that.
Yeah, that is a good point about especially the bishop pair in general. Sometimes short-term bishops might not be impressive, but if you hold on to them long-term and the position opens up, they can be very, very, very dangerous. In this position, they're still kind of kept at bay. Bishop on e8, just a very depressed piece, and the bishop on e7, not that impressive. But it is a good question, what is White's plan here? Not sure if White has any immediate threats, but maybe it's just to improve, like start pushing pawns, maybe improve the king. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sam can maybe try and grind this out for a win.
Yes, so he just actually took the rook on d3.
Aha, so the trade of rooks.
Which can be an interesting idea because black really wants to play c5 and bishop c6, but with the rook being stuck on b8, the c7 can be an issue because the king can be in checkmate.
That's
so when
true.
we move the king to b8, then we can develop the bishop, and then the a6 pawn can be a weakness. I'm not sure. I think it is okay for black, this position.
Yeah, as long as you can kind of defend your weaknesses and not allow too much progress to be made. But I think it's a lot more fun for White to play in this position. Sam appears to be thinking here. Oh no, he moved. He played rook take d3, so keeping the rook on the open file. And just to demonstrate your idea, if black plays immediate c5, it could just walk into knight d5, which could spell a lot of trouble for black, given that the knight takes c7 would be a mate threat. And bishop d8 appears to be the only move, and then maybe White could play e6, and this looks pretty devastating.
Now, what if we go for the game of the day between Josh Friedel against Alejandro Ramirez?
So moving
I think
into
we did not
Group
spend
B.
much time there.
Yeah, we were taking a look at what happened earlier. Let's take a look at the current position. We have queen, rook, and knight for both sides, equal material. It's a little bit imbalanced because White has these overextended pawns on e5 and c5. And whenever you have pawns extended far down the board, they can either be strengths or weaknesses. And in this case, I would have to argue that these pawns are more weak than they are strong. What do you think about this position?
I agree. I think these pawns are weak, especially because they cannot move. They don't have their, any friends nearby, how I always used to say it, to defend them or help them to advance. Now I lost the position here.
Well, we have it on this board. It is black's move. White just played rook take bishop on e4, and I would imagine Alejandro is probably considering something like rook d5 or rook d1, and just try and increase pressure. Sometimes you won't be able to win something right away, but if you can optimize your pieces and really put the pressure on.
Yeah, and we can look at the rooks and the knights. I mean, the black rook is operating on the file, is doing great. The white rook is kind of being stuck on the file. The knight on e6 is attacking c5 pawn. The knight of f3 is passive. I mean, we can clearly see that the black pieces are coordinated better. But there are not many pieces left on the board, so that can be an issue for black to try to take bigger advantage of this.
That's right. We should move on to the Vasif Durarbayli game, because that was exciting earlier, and I'm just trying to find it. There's a lot of games to go through here.
Now there is a huge time advantage.
Wow.
Vasif has 1 hour and his opponent has only 30 minutes.
But they did make time control, so at least Fridman is not in danger of losing on time. But we can see he's took a lot of time earlier. Queens have been traded. Queen f3 was played.
Oh, there is amazing trick. I think white is in serious trouble, because now white has to move rook back on the e file to be defending the bishop. But then I have an amazing threat with bishop b4. So if you move, let's say, rook e3, I have bishop b4, and you cannot capture the bishop because g1 is a queen.
Yeah, the bishop is pinned to the g1 square. That's a nice tactic.
So you can try to do something like rook e8 to pin the bishop.
So rook e8 instead of rook e3.
Yes, exactly. To try to pin the bishop, but I can go just king f7.
Very simply, king f7. The rook is tied down. This could be over for white very soon. Because f5 is a threat. Black is keeping the initiative.
I mean, if we go back just before queen g2, it's really nice to see these tactics, how it unfolds. Because the position looks very normal. But
Yeah, if White could just have a
Yeah.
couple moves, take on G2 and hold
Exactly.
things together, but that's the power of the initiative. And that's also the power of having a pawn very far down the board. There's sometimes more unusual tactics which exist, which involve pawn promotion. And we see that in this case where the bishop is just pinned to the square.
So White played rook e6 in the game. This is what happened. So White is trying to get as many pieces as possible for a piece that he's going to lose. So he's giving up the bishop, but he has a pawn, and the king side is 2-on-2. But what do you think, Eric, about this?
So I think we can safely say that this position will happen. I see it's already being played out after rook take e1 and king take g2. This is a current position. I think it's just an easy win for black. I mean,
Absolutely.
especially with this pawn being fixed on the dark square.
That's what we
Moves
can
like
look.
Rook e4.
Pawn on f2
bishop
is dark
h6.
square. Pawn on f4 is dark square. We are just going to take them sooner or later.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to
let's move on.
What game? I like the game between the active Var Akobian against Indjic. Var being black.
That's
and
right.
Indjic
This was a
being
Nimzo
white.
game which seemed to be exploding earlier, but the position is closed down. If we go back to where we left off after g4, it appeared that black was maybe considering some sacrifice, but chose probably a safer move, knight hf4, also the most natural move. White played d5. Killing the
And that's
bishop.
something that White had to do. White
That's
had
right.
to block the bishop from being attacking the king, and finally, feeling some safety for the White king.
Yeah, and that's a really important strategy when you're being attacked. You want to close down the position as much as possible. In this case, black was trying to create more open lines, especially along the e-file and along the diagonal. I really like this move d5 because it closes both lines simultaneously. If we go forward, the pieces on d3 got traded. Black still has some pressure. I probably would still prefer black given this f4 square. Looks very juicy for a knight. Though he chose knight h4, which goes after the f3 pawn. And knight e1, d6.
I
trying
always
to
thought
maneuver the
that
bishop.
black will want to play something like b5 to try to attack the pawn chain and make some weaknesses and maybe bring the bishop back. But it's very difficult to do it soon, because still, even if we trade on c4, there is just not much. We
That's
don't have
true.
pieces to attack the c4 square.
And sometimes you have to identify what area of the board that you want to play on. And I think this holds true for a lot of different types of positions. You have to identify, do you play on the king side, do you play on the queen side, do you play in the center? I think the main focus for black is to play on the king side. So maybe that's why he's holding off on a move like b5, and he chose maybe the more positional bishop to c8. And looks like
So
this
that
is
was an
the
important
current
decision.
position.
So he decided that the bishop is kind of done on the diagonal h8 to a8 to h1, and he's trying to move the bishop somewhere else.
That's right. And even though the bishop doesn't look too effective on c8 currently, he might be fathoming some ideas of some potential h5 later. For example, if he can play g6 and h5, just trying to create more open lines for the pieces. We can also envision the very straightforward queen to f7, where black would just have a massive battery on the f-file. I think we call this the Alekhine's gun, where we have both rooks and the queen along one open file, in this case, one half open file. And there could be some trouble for white here. I mean, the position looks relatively passive. We have a few more moves here. White played rook a2, and black played rook to f4. And I believe this is the current position where, okay, the rook looks very nicely placed, maybe considering some rook d4 ideas. And I mean, this just looks a lot more fun for Var.
I agree. I like this position for black.
So any other games to move on to? I'm kind of scrolling through here. We should note to the viewers that you can view all the games on uschesschamps.com and see the two sections. The games are being broadcast live via Chess24. So feel free to take a look yourself. And I mean, there's so much high-level chess to cover.
Yeah.
So
And feel free to ask
yeah.
questions or comment. We will try to answer any questions that you give us. So
That's right. I do want to go back to the Dinara Sadua Kosova game against Camille Dragon, because the positions are kind of heating up where Black is going for this very feisty pawn break with h4, trying to maybe destabilize the king side. And we can imagine that Black might be considering some future f4 as well, where this bishop could be short on squares. I really like the way Dinara is playing. I mean, she's being resourceful with the pieces she has, and in this case, with kings on opposite sides, Black really wants to make an effort to open up the king side.
Absolutely, and you also see that the pawn on h5 is a huge weakness, so we want to get rid of it. And maybe open the h file, get the rook there as well. That can be another option.
That's true, and I think from Black's perspective in this position, because Black has kind of the focus on the king side, it's important for Black to keep material on the board. You don't want to trade rooks or queens without any reason, and if Black can keep the pressure, I wouldn't be so thrilled as White. But we should note the time situation. Dinara has less than 2 minutes with her time ticking down.
But also White is pawn up. I mean, I'm still happy with White because there's no threat. Our king is safe. Our position is safe. Oh, we have a game that is over. So let's see what happens.
Game over. We see Vasif.
So Vasif
on
probably
the right
won.
side against Daniel Fridman on screen. I see the bishop
Yes,
on g1.
That's what we predicted.
That's great.
Bishop up. So let's see just the game.
So
How it's finished.
And I am being told that we will have Vasif for an interview. So as soon as he can come down, I'm very curious to ask him about kind of the opening preparation in this game and see how much was preparation, how much was kind of over the board play. I am looking for the final position here just to see how the game concluded. The finish is it's very unfortunate for White. The threat of bishop h2, pretty much unstoppable.
Getting the pawn on f4.
Not only is Black winning a pawn here, it looks like some
even.
kind of mating net. Let's say White pushes a pawn, bishop h2, king h3, bishop take f4. Mate would be pretty much unstoppable.
Game over. Yes, you could even try some of your tricks to maybe go first king, somehow to force g5. But I don't see how to do that. And try some stalemates.
Yeah.
That's your specialty.
I love the stalemate tricks, but I think
But
Vasif would be too good to fall for any of that.
Yeah.
So very nice finish. So as we're waiting for Vasif to get in the commentary room,
let's look at
any
the
other
game of
games?
Sam Sevian against Peter Prohaszka. I think that's the really interesting game with the two bishops and how Black is kind of developing them or not, or waiting.
More not developing the two bishops.
That's true, but
I don't think they've
I
moved.
see a future here with the bishop on e8 going to d7, c8, and the a6 pawn, I do want to mention that can be a weakness.
Ah, I see what you mean. Yeah, the far extended pawn on a6 doesn't have any defenders. It does take a long time to attack that pawn, though.
But how do you want to stop it?
That is a point. So you're saying Black could maybe go for something like rook d8, trade rooks, and then bishop d7, bishop
Let's
c8.
see.
Well, it's White's move here. And,
Oh,
and
yeah,
both
that's
players
true.
are in time pressure. And they still have, what, 12 moves to make before time control.
But I think this is a great position to see how the bishops, even if they are on the back rank, can be strong and because they have the future. Now, White played e6 in the position.
Yeah, e6 could be a very thematic move, going for the passed pawn.
And you want to think about your bishop on f2, which is not developed, doesn't do anything, and getting into g3 and the diagonal there, attacking the king, that's a future.
That's right. Well, we're going to keep a close eye on this game, but we're going to break, and we'll be back with Vasif Durarbayli.
This is a crucial situation in this game. Matheny must make a move, but what will it be? All eyes are on Matheny.
Could make a move a lot easier if you weren't doing that right next to me.
It doesn't bother me. Check.
The St. Louis Chess Club, celebrating 10 years of promoting, teaching, and playing the game of chess. Visit the St. Louis Chess Club and help celebrate our 10th anniversary.
A moment comes in chess when you need to test yourself at a different level. Chess 24 Premium offers the tools that you need to reach your maximum potential. From hundreds of interactive video lessons to becoming part of the Chess 24 community. You can analyze with friends or coach your students live. You get 24/7 coverage of chess news and events, access to premium analysis and commentary, and the chance to interact with grandmasters and other top players and coaches. Get advice from the best and even challenge them to a battle. Be the best chess player you can be. It's time to level up your game with Chess 24 Premium membership.
Hello and welcome back to the Summer Classic. I am International Master Eric Rosen here with Grandmaster Vasif Durarbayli. And congratulations, Vasif, you had a very nice win today.
Thank you very much.
So I do want to ask about your opening preparation. It seemed like a theoretical line in the Grunfeld. So if you can walk us through the opening.
Actually, I did not expect him playing this line. He usually goes here g3 instead of knight c3s.
Aha, so maybe avoiding
like
the traditional Grunfeld.
anti-groove and usually. But so I wasn't really prepared against knight c3, but okay, it is the main line. Here, I did not know bishop d2 move. I knew that the main line is c takes d5, knight d5, bishop c4. So the idea of bishop d2 is to take c takes d5, knight d5, e4, and when I take knight c3, he would have bishop c3 move. So I didn't want to allow him that. So I played knight c6. The idea is that if white takes c takes d5, knight d5, e4, here I can take knight c3, bishop c3, and bishop g4. So I think black should be
That
okay.
looks nice. It looks like a kind of a dream Grunfeld setup where you have a ton of pressure against the d4 pawn.
So that's why he played h3. He didn't want me to play bishop g4, so I took d takes c4.
So yeah, let's go forward and see where the position got a bit spicier, because it seemed like things got very complex after the sequence knight a5, bishop a6, and c5, and the position really seemed to explode.
I was expecting maybe bishop take b7, rook d1, knight b7, rook fd1, something like that. But white doesn't have anything, so position should be around equal. But when he played d takes c5, it was a little bit risky because king gets weak, so bishops.
That's right, bishop take f3. How were you feeling around this point after bishop take f3, g take f3?
I felt like I had attack, and probably playing with black would be easier. So
yeah, it certainly seemed more fun to go for some kingside play. And now the other commentator, Katerina, was wondering about this move a bit later, where you played a very unusual after bishop e7, rook to c8, leaving the rook hanging. Were you concerned that you might be just losing material after bishop takes c8?
No, I mean, when I played, it was my idea to sacrifice exchange and attack. So I don't think that after bishop c8, white is better, because bishop c8, rook c8. Now I want to play knight e5, so I think white needs to play something like f4. And here I wasn't sure what to choose. Black has several options, like e5 here is really interesting, or just take knight b4. I mean, knight b4 also fine. Then I would have knight g4.
Seems like a position rich with ideas for black and maybe a lot less pleasant for white.
It was kind of positional sacrifice, long term.
For sure.
Yeah, white's king is weak. So that's why he played queen f1. He didn't like this position. Here I was considering queen f1, king f1, rook c7, but after bishop c6, position I did not really like. I think it's slightly better for white. Pass pawn, they can create pass pawn.
That's true.
It should be equal. So, but after queen h5, I thought I had better chances.
At what point did you feel like it was a turning point where you really had a stable advantage?
When he did not take my exchange, I'll go a little bit for e5, f4, knight f3. Here I knew that my position is much better, and it is really hard to play with white. So
of course, especially if when you keep queens on the board, the king is never safe with kind of the open pawn structure on the king side. And the conversion seemed pretty smooth. I mean, the rest of the game.
I think he blundered after knight d5, rook b5, but I don't know what else white can play. I mean,
Yeah, the
idea is
pieces
to-
do not look too impressive for white, and
Yeah.
I mean, it seemed like a simple tactic that
Mhm.
maybe white overlooked, but okay, what else to do?
But yeah, when your position is bad, it is really easy to overlook.
It's just
some
the
idea,
snowball
yeah.
effect, yeah.
So I was expecting actually instead of rook b1, a4 maybe.
Hmm.
A4, but here also I was considering e5.
Yeah, such a thematic idea
Yeah.
for the Grunfeld, just open up more lines,
Yeah,
maybe
this
try and get the
is-
rook in.
This is really hard
That's right.
to play for white. So after rook b1, e5, knight d5.
I do want to ask about the final tactic. I mean, me and Katerina were pretty impressed with this final pawn promotion
Oh,
tactic. How far in advance did you see that, or did it just kind of come about?
Here I felt like I should win
Hmm.
easily, but I didn't see for a long time how to win. But when I h5 I played, I think rook c4 was a bad move.
In this position?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe he should have played rook b4 instead of rook c4, rook b4.
Hmm.
So
And what's the difference?
the difference is that now I cannot really play h4 because white would play rook b8.
And just go for
So
counterplay.
in my game he didn't have rook c8 because rook e1, queen e1, go back. Because rook
Oh,
c4,
I see. So
h4,
some nice
rook
tactics
c8,
here.
rook e1.
And the rook is undefended on c8.
Yes.
So just a small detail sometimes
Yeah.
can change a lot of things between rook c4 to c8 and rook b4 to b8.
Yeah, after rook b4 I wasn't really sure. I was thinking about taking e1 and take.
Oh, go into the queen ending?
Yeah. It was gonna be a long
Seemed
game.
like it would be a very long fight from here. These
But-
positions are not
but
easy to win.
I mean, black should win somehow.
For sure.
But it's not easy. Yeah, I agree. So after h4, queen e4.
Seemed like the use of the h pawn really helped you out.
Yes.
And when you played queen g2, you saw the
Yeah,
finish.
no, of course.
Yeah, that's very nice. So not a bad start to the tournament. Perfect score so far. It's only the first day. How are you feeling going forward?
Well, I mean, it is too early to say something. Let's see how next games are going.
Do you know who you play tomorrow?
I think Indjic. I'm playing against Indjic, if I am not mistaken.
Any thoughts on that game?
Well, I think I haven't played against him, so I'm not familiar with his style. So I'm going to check tonight.
Very nice. And I do want to ask you too. We are former teammates at Webster University.
Yes.
I know you're still a student there. Are you done with the semester?
Tomorrow I have my last class and I have essay. No, actually a research paper. I need to finish it tonight.
That's got to be really tough,
Yeah,
balancing
it's
the chess preparation and the research
Yeah,
paper.
and tomorrow also I have final at night. I don't know.
Wow.
Let's see how things go.
Well, I'll let you go. Best of luck with your research paper and with the next games. And we'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more coverage.
Thank you very much.
There's a weekend vacation, a one-tank trip in a nearby city you won't want to skip. St. Louis is the stop for non-stop fun. So much fun for your family, infinity plus a ton. There's museums full of art and super fun slides. Upside-down concretes, twisty, turny rides. Houses full of magic, some with butterflies. Gardens growing flowers, parks with giant eyes. St. Louis is the stop for non-stop fun. So much fun for your family, infinity plus a ton.
This August, the best chess players in the world are coming to St. Louis for the Grand Chess Tour. The St. Louis Rapid and Blitz and Sinkfield Cup tournaments will feature the world's best right here in St. Louis. St. Louis Chess Club is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and these tournaments will be a highlight you won't want to miss. For tickets and more information, go to stlouischessclub.org.
Welcome back to the Summer Chess Classic. I'm Katerina Nemcova here with Eric Rosen, and we have some results for the round 1. So let's see what happened.
Yeah, we have, I believe, 3 games finished in each section. In Group A, we have, oh, my mistake, we only have 2 games finished in this section. We have Yaro Jerabuk, who drew against Benjamin Bach, and Vasif Durarbayli defeating Daniel Fridman. With 3 games still pending, I think the game's still going. Some of them are very exciting. I know we were taking a look at the Sam Sevian game earlier, and I think we should focus on this one just for a little bit because the rook endgame looks incredibly instructive, and it seems like Sam is pushing for a win, given the position of his rook, his pawn, his king. Everything seems to be going in White's favor, but do you think White has enough potential to actually convert the advantage?
I mean, White is just on the road with the king to h5, g6, and that can be very hard to stop. Unless I can go king d8, king e8, king f7 quickly enough, which
That's
probably
right.
I cannot.
And we should note that Black is probably debating between the only 2 logical moves here, either king d7 or rook to e8. But I'm not sure if these moves make much of a difference, given that White's plan is just so clear to play king
Can we
h5.
just go back? I'm curious how this happened because I really like the bishops. Everything looked
You did like the
great
bishops.
for
I don't
Black,
think they
and
ever
suddenly
turned into anything.
I feel like I'm losing.
So let's go back to where the bishops were still in existence.
So the e6 was, I think, the last move that we went.
Right, and bishop d6. So Black was able to activate at least the dark squared bishop. Knight e4, logical. Bishop e5. So
Also,
the bishop
I'm
came to
just,
life.
Can you just go back for a second after
Sure.
e6? Do you agree with bishop d6? I thought that our goal was to trade the rooks with rook d8. Unless there is a tactical trap somewhere.
Rook d8 certainly looks logical. It might walk into bishop g3.
King
And surprisingly
c8.
enough, this a7 pawn could fall in the end after some line like
But then I trap
bishop
your
e8.
bishop, no?
Ah, you want to be tricky with king c7.
But you have knight a5.
Knight a4. It's kind of a funny line. I mean, the bishop needs to be rescued by the knight, but I think White would be doing very well here. And again, these bishops not coming to life. So it seemed like Peter made a logical decision trying to activate at least one bishop.
Because there is also one interesting line that after rook d8, bishop g3.
So in this line, rook d8, bishop g3. Okay.
Yes, if I go now bishop d6, there is e7.
Rook d7.
Rook d7, and now I can go rook takes d6.
Ah, making
knight
use of some
e5.
pin tactics
So
after
that may be something.
after rook take d6, the rook being pinned. And whenever there's a pinned piece, you should attack the pinned piece. Don't take the pinned piece. Knight e4 would just be winning for White.
So there were some issues with Black just wasn't fast enough to develop, although the position looked okay. Okay, so that happened. Bishop d6, knight e4. So let's go there.
And yeah, let's get to the current position. We do have a move that was played, king d7. We'll go forward. There's some dancing around with the knight, like going from b7 to d8. Very unusual outpost squares that you don't see every day.
So we see the pawn on a6 is again very strong.
Right.
We thought
and we
maybe
have
it
the
can be a
current
weakness.
position.
Okay,
King
so
d7,
king d7
king h5.
happened. King h5, obviously.
So the problem for Black is the king is tied down to the c6 pawn. So a move like king e8 could walk into rook takes c6. And meanwhile, what else is Black doing? I mean,
that's
White
the
just wants to
issue.
win.
That even if we exchange rooks or something, Black has nothing on the queen side. The double pawn does not allow to create a free pawn. And thus the white king on the king side can just win some advantage.
Yeah, I would have to say it's over. I mean, we don't have engine analysis to support it, but I mean, we were admiring Peter's choice earlier on, saying the Berlin is a good choice against Sam. But Sam has proven that he can play some positional masterpiece, given his play in this game. I mean, this is just exactly what White wants from a Berlin opening, is to get this passed pawn with the kingside majority.
I agree. I think the game is over. It was very nice play for Sam. I think Peter was fine at some moment, but then it was just difficult to move with the pieces around, and then he got into difficulties.
That's right.
It just
and
happens.
We should move on to another really exciting game that's taking place between Alexander Indjic and Varuzhin Akobian. Position has opened up. If I'm counting material, it is equal. But White's king looks very suspicious.
I mean, every
F2.
time you see knight and queen around the king, that's a problem.
And
that's
in
a
this case,
red
knight,
flag.
bishop, and queen, right?
Yes. Just by looking at the position, I think White is not doing very good.
Yeah, I mean, especially with queens on the board. White's last move was knight e2. Where do you think the queen should move in this position?
I mean, what if I stay there with the queen and then just move the pawns? Like
Well,
H5,
the queen's attacked,
H4.
right?
I mean, queen b2, sorry.
Oh,
I
queen
see that
b2.
that's what happened. Queen b2.
Queen b2 is played, I see. So now White is the one under pressure. And yeah, the strategy for Black is just to keep material on the board, especially keep queens on the board, and just keep the pressure on White. And we should note that these kingside pawns, even though they don't look too menacing right now, they are passed pawns and they could be relevant later in the endgame. Maybe Black doesn't want to start pushing too early because they do provide some shelter for the king.
Yeah. The good part for White is that they pass the control. They have 30 minutes. The time control is done. They are
That's
moved
true.
41. So at least White can think about how to coordinate his pieces and survive this. Because if you have enough time, sometimes you can find the perfect moves to just defend it.
Yeah, and even though it's uncomfortable for White, yeah, that's a good point, is if you have enough time to play accurately, it might not be so bad. But if the players get into time trouble again, this will be a lot more unpleasant to play for White given the position. So we should definitely keep an eye on this. I'm sure, given that the players have reached the time control, that there will be some long things. Any other games to look at?
What can we do here?
I mean, we should maybe go back to the game of the day.
We have a result
right?
of Sam Sevian between Peter Prohaszka.
Oh, is that game?
Yeah,
that game
like
is over?
we said, king h5, and there is really nothing that Black can do against the king attacking the pawns on the king side. Just game over.
It's beautiful. I mean, after seeing this game, I might be inspired to try and play against the Berlin from the White side. And not only just the play in the opening, but kind of the long-term strategy for White, really keeping Black's pieces restricted. I think this will be a very instructive game to show my students.
Yes, I really like this. And I'm curious what Sam is going to say about the opening option that his opponent chose, if he felt comfortable or not. I hope we're going to get him to the studio.
Yeah, I mean, he just finished, so it's possible. Let's switch gears. Let's take a look at the Jeffrey Xiong game, which we haven't looked at too recently. A lot has happened. The last time we looked at it, Jeffrey was winning all Black's pawns, but he was down a piece after we saw this e5 move with the fork and the material imbalanced. And it looked more pleasant for White, but let's go to the current position where Black still has the extra minor piece, not on f6. But White has 3 pawns for the piece. This passed e-pawn could be a bit dangerous. Still very imbalanced. It's going to be a fight. Do you have a side that you would prefer here?
I think the Black knight on f6 is very restricted. It cannot really go anywhere, so the piece is a little useless. And if we get as White the pawn on g5, I think the pawns on the king side really defend the king well. So I don't think White is worried about the game here. So I think White is the one who is playing for...
I would probably agree. Like the king is safe enough. G5 is a weakness. And sometimes when you have 2 strong points, or a strong point and a weakness for the opponent, that gives you more to play for in the position. Where in this case, because White has a passed e-pawn, the Black queen might be a bit tied down, and then White can try and overwhelm Black by trying to attack the g5 pawn as well. It's what we call the principle of 2 weaknesses in chess, and it can be a very powerful mechanism. So it is Black's move here. Jumabayev is taking some time to figure out what to do next.
So
I will say it's not fun for Black to play because it doesn't seem like there's any active play, so sometimes Black just has to wait and White might be having more fun.
Yeah, I think this is similar to the Vasif's game where he was, pawn up and just pushing, maybe playing for 1 hour. I mean, the game finished much sooner because of the tactics. But it's a game where the weak side may get tired after many moves. And I think Jeffrey is just too skilled in these positions to outplay.
I mean, it's what we call playing for 2 results, where you have a comfortable advantage, you don't want to risk too much, but you can play a long game, try and provoke some mistakes from your opponent. And I mean, as we know as former Spice students, that's a very good strategy in team chess, where you don't want to take too many risks, but you want to have these kind of long fights where you can grind down your opponent.
So let's look at the game in the B tournament, the key game of the day, against Josh Friedel against Alejandro Ramirez.
Almost forgot about this game.
Yeah, and now we have Josh Friedel, who is a pawn up in a knight endgame.
Josh is actually down a pawn. It's Alejandro playing for a win,
down.
I believe.
That's true.
2 on 3 on the king side. Have you ever had this position before? I feel like this is common enough where maybe you've had this type of position
I
before?
had a similar position. I mean, similar only that it was knight endgame and pawn up, but the pawn was on the queen side, and that's much easier to play when you have a passed pawn, especially in knight endgames, because the pawn just goes, the knight has to defend it, and then you can focus on the king side. While
That's
in
right.
this position, this pawn up may not be such a huge advantage, or maybe difficult to transfer it to a whole win.
Yeah, I would say probably with perfect play, this position should be a draw. But I would expect Alejandro to try and torture Josh in this position. That this could be a very long fight. And it's all about trying to create the passed pawn, to try and use the knight to control the key squares, to prevent White from simplifying in any way. I've actually had the same ending as from the White side, where I was down a pawn, and I had to defend, and it's not fun. There's going to be some torture in this game, and
How did you finish the game?
I managed to draw, except my opponent probably had some chances to win. It wasn't the most precise game from either side. I forget my opponent. It happened probably 4 or 5 years ago. But I will say with long games like this, it can take a toll on your physical energy, and sometimes the strategy is, at least from the black side, you want to wear down your opponent physically, so you might provoke some mistake in some later critical position.
Yes, and if you look at the game between Kamil Dragun and Dinara Sadukasova, we have again a position where White is, this time White, is pawn up, and it will be the same. Long game, opposite colored bishops, but Black will have difficult time of defending this. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's another kind of torture position where, okay, White is playing for 2 results, trying to grind down Black. And again, probably with perfect play, it should be a draw, but in a practical scenario, I mean, humans are not going to play perfectly. And especially White's potential to make a passed pawn on the king side, with White's king already being on the king side to help support a passed pawn, this doesn't look fun for Black to defend, and I would probably choose White playing for a win over Black playing for a draw.
I mean, I think that would be an easy choice to do here. But what I want to say is these positions are really, they really show well how grandmasters differ from normal players or weaker players who can really, grandmasters can very often defend this with black pieces. And that's the real strength, to be able to not lose a game that looks much worse as an endgame. Whereas if you play it against a club player or somebody who is much weaker, he can collapse immediately and you can win an easy game. But this can be a really long fight.
That's true. And we should note, the one kind of upside for Black is that any sort of trade of rooks should end in a draw. So sometimes Black can use that to maybe threaten some trades, maybe go for some idea like bishop c6 to b5 and play rook c4, and use kind of this notion of theoretically drawn endings to try and improve the position and not let Whites get too much play. But it's going to be another long fight, and a lot of these games could go on much, much longer.
So let's go back to Indjic against Akobian game. Because it's very nice how white tried to exchange the queens to get into safe position, but black declined and played queen b1.
Yeah, I would have to say this is probably the most exciting game out of all the games left. Is that, I mean, the queens are still on the board. There's going to be some fire happening. The white king, very unsafe. I like this queen b1 move, controlling the first rank, attacking the e4 pawn. But, I mean, it's still not clear how black is actually going to win this position.
Yeah, because the knight on g2 and e2, they're actually really good. They are defending the g1 square, the e1
key
square.
Squares, right?
So it's not that easy to go and attack the king. But I think move like h5 is going to come sooner or later.
At some point, black might have to resort to pushing the pawns to try and apply even more pressure. I think we can assume white will somehow defend the pawn, maybe a move like queen e3.
Or
I
there
don't
is
really
actually,
see what else to do.
if you play queen e3, what if I do something like knight g5, where I try to attack the pawn on e4 again, and maybe transfer the knight to h3 to, to push the king around to see what can happen.
That's a very possible idea, yeah. I was actually looking at a bit more exotic move, knight h2. Okay, this might be too exotic, but going for this f1 square. It seems like black has a lot of potential with ideas in the position. Not to mention that if you want to be positional as black, you could just play the very safe knight e5, the ideas of knight d3. And I think it's really important to point out, I know we mentioned this earlier, but the queen-knight combination is just so powerful because the queen and knight can coordinate in ways that other pieces just can't. And especially when you're attacking the king, it's a tough combination to defend against.
And also, when we look at the white pawns, they're all on white squares. So if at some moment the bishop gets to d1, I mean, that's a problem.
So you're thinking long term, yeah.
Yeah, because,
No.
I mean, you may want to think, let's say queen e3, knight g5.
So queen e3, knight g5,
Knight g5.
okay.
And let's say to go something like, okay, you cannot go knight g3 because there is knight h3 checkmate, but somehow to move
Let's
the
just show that just for the younger viewers. That's a pretty aesthetic checkmate there. Queen, the knight, the bishop, all taking away squares from the king.
So that's the issue with knights. Knights are not very...
Right. I think it's interesting. There's probably two different ways black could try and win this position. One is by trying to go for the attack, where you're going for some mating attack against the king. The other way is going for positional play, where if the queens do someday come off the board, white's pawn, especially on b3 or e4, could be weak. Black has the passed pawns. So I think there's many different chances for Var Akobian to come out on top in this game.
Yes, I think Var is absolutely the favorite here because he can be trying and trying, put traps and traps. And you have to remember that white is playing already like 2 hours, or actually maybe 3 hours, 4 hours. And then you get tired and you make a mistake, and Var can immediately take advantage of that because he's not getting that tired. When you are defending, it's more difficult job than to attack. So I think this can be a really hard game for white.
That's right. And I mean, we should identify. So the games left are Var Akobian, Alexander Indjic. We have Jeffrey Xiong against Rinat Jumabayev.
So let's look at the results so far.
Yeah, we should take a look at what's happening in the tournament. 3 games are done in the A group. As we mentioned before, Jerebuk Benjamin Bach ended in a draw. Sam Sevian defeated Peter Prohaszka in a beautiful positional masterpiece in the Berlin. And we had Vasif Durarbayli defeating Daniel Fridman with the black pieces. And I should note, at the GM level, it's not easy to win games as black, so that's a very good start for Vasif. 2 games still pending. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Indjic Akobian game finishes.
Yeah, both games are super interesting, and I think we will all follow them. But let's look for the pairings for tomorrow, for the second round. So we have Benjamin Bach playing against Rinat Jumabayev, Akobian with Jeffrey Xiong. That's going to be really interesting game, especially when they played already in the championship this year. Then we have Vasif against Indjic, Vasif Durarbayli, Alexander Indjic, Peter Prohaszka against Daniel Fridman, and Yaro Jerebuk against Sam Sevian.
Yeah, lots of exciting matchups for tomorrow. Let's take a look at the results for Group B so far. And we have 2 games still pending between Camille Dragon and Dinara Sadua Kasova. And also the game of the day, Joshua Friedel against Alejandro Ramirez. And those could be very, very long fights.
None of the games that are still pending are like boring or looking for a draw. They can all be decisive results.
Not at all, but we should point out the only decisive game in Group B so far is Ali Morandi Vladimir Ballas game, where it was just determined by some careless blunder. So not a bad start for Morandi.
Yeah. So let's look at the pairings for tomorrow.
So tomorrow we have a series of matchups. We have Dinara against Ali Morandi. We have Andrei Stukopin against Ballas. Ramirez against Aghasaryan. We have Matsenko against Friedel. And Camille Dragon against Tatev Abrahamian. So I think we're going to cut it short here. If you want to follow the games, go to uschesschamps.com and you can see all the games in beautiful format. And we will be back at 1 p.m. Actually, we'll be back at 3:30 p.m. Central Time tomorrow with the broadcast. The games will start at 1 p.m. in St. Louis. Stay tuned, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye.
This has been a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club.